This is Dr. David D. Schein, and welcome to another exciting edition of Saving America. We've got a great program for you today, starting with our usual lineup. It's in the news and the Biden administration and its anti-Israel program. Rumor of the week, another Clinton reporter appears to be dead. Reportedly a suicide. We'll talk a little bit more about that. And then in our Just a Fact segment, we've got a great guest today. We've got Scott F. Paradise, the student of life and a seeker of ultimate truth, to quote him, a 30-year veteran of the Army who retired as a colonel, which is a very high rank. And he's a heavily published author and trainer. And I think you'll enjoy listening to him. So let's just get started right away with the Biden administration continues its anti-Israel agenda. Hard to believe, given that Israel is our only key ally in the Middle East, a very important part of the world, and the huge support in the United States by Jewish Americans for the Democratic Party. Really doesn't make a lot of sense, folks. But the Biden administration brilliantly sent money to Hamas, which they then used to begin an incredible missile storm on top of Israel, injuring many civilians, demolishing a lot of civilian buildings and things like that, clearly done for purely terrorist purposes. Hundreds and hundreds of missiles were launched. Fortunately, Israel has the missile dome system, and it did generally work pretty well. There were missiles that did get through, unfortunately, and injured innocent Israeli citizens. But what was interesting, of course, is that Israel predictably retaliated, as they should have, and there were a lot of civilian casualties in the Hamas-controlled areas. And it's kind of interesting because then it makes Israel look like the bad guys. But the folks from Hamas, of course, very brave terrorists. They hide behind their own civilians that they're supposed to be representing and protecting. And of course, after Israel committed quite a bit of retaliatory damage to Hamas-controlled areas, they suddenly decided, oh, maybe we'll reach a truce. So they're under a truce. They have never reached a true peace over there. Kind of interesting little side note that came out last week. Israel offered the Palestinian Authority 1 million doses of anti-COVID vaccine. The idiots at the Palestinian Authority, of course, turned it down. Other countries have volunteered to take it. I thought that was kind of interesting. So I'm not sure why the Palestinian authorities would want to deny such an important protection to their population. But then again, it's about politics. It's not about protecting these people. And we've all known that for over 70 years since the Israeli state was established. Keep in mind that Trump declared the Golan Heights part of Israel. Israel gained the Golan Heights in a battle with Syria. Syria started it in 1967, one of the very famous wars between the Middle Eastern parties and the Israelis. Israel largely was considered to be occupying the territory for their own defense. The heights are literally overlooking parts of Israel. It's very important to Israel's defense. But the Trump administration went ahead and said, yeah, you know what, that's part of your country. Well, the Biden administration backed that down, which is a very dangerous thing to do, in my opinion, and doesn't serve any particular purpose. After all, Syria is largely controlled by Iranian terrorist influences. And so it is really not a place that you'd want to give the Golan Heights back to. If there was a long-term peace agreement, I think it might be possible. But this is something that's really not working out, I think, for the Biden administration, and it's certainly not working out for the world peace. This comes at an interesting time because in the last couple of weeks, Netanyahu had 12 years, was the longest serving prime minister of Israel. recently was deposed. There were fair elections there. There is a composite or a consensus government there led by, let me get his name right, Naftali Bennett is the new prime minister. And I would have thought the Biden administration would have wanted to establish some peace trails with the new prime minister, get off to a good start. Since clearly Netanyahu and the Democrats never did get along, but they've obviously blown that opportunity as they've blown so many opportunities. And as you know, in our previous Saving America, we talked about Biden's failure at the first international summit of his, the G7 summit. So this is just a continuation of failed policy after failed policy after failed interaction. And at some point, the American people have got to demand accountability from the White House.
Well, the weakest link. Goodbye.
Speaking of the White House and one of its former occupants, of course, good old Bill and Hillary Clinton is the rumor of the week. And so let me properly disclaim this. In my book, The Decline of America, I note that while there are a number of unusual deaths surrounding the Clinton administration and people who may have been able to testify or had bad information or negative information about the Clinton people, the Clinton couple, nothing has ever been proved. So these are strictly rumors. They are nothing more. Nothing's ever been proven. And that's, just the way it is. But the latest chapter in this very strange tale that stretches over a 30, 40-year period now is Christopher Schein, who's 45, was found dead by Hoover, Alabama police around 8:13 a.m. this past Saturday, June 12th, after police received a call of a person down at his Scout Trace home. I'm not sure what that is, but apparently in the little town where he lived. And this was reported as a suicide. Let me underscore that. Reported as a suicide. Why do we care? How's it related to the Clinton administration? Well, he was the reporter who broke the 2016 story of Bill Clinton having a so-called accidental meeting on the runway in Phoenix with then AG, Attorney General Loretta Lynch, who was supposed to be investigating a very serious breach of American security. That was that Hillary Clinton decided not to use the proper protected encrypted email of the United States government while she was Secretary of State, actually had her own server in a closet at her house. Yes. That came out later, 60,000 emails, and she supposedly edited them to remove her personal emails when she was forced to produce them. But there was never any prosecution. So Bill Clinton supposedly only talked about family matters with Loretta Lynch. But gee, it's kind of interesting how that investigation of Hillary Clinton's very serious breach of security, this is not a debatable issue. And other people have gone to jail and have had their lives ruined for committing much, much lower security violations. So we're not sure what Bill and Loretta Lynch talked about, but it certainly is an interesting story that she was never prosecuted. And all of a sudden, some years later, Mr. Schein commits suicide at only 45 years old. That's the rumor of the week.
Just the facts, ma'am.
Welcome to our Just the Facts segment for today. We've got Scott F. Paradis, who calls himself a student of life and a seeker of ultimate truth, a 30-year Army veteran. He retired as a colonel. He presently lives in Eagle River, Alaska with his family. This appears to be sort of a suburb of Anchorage, a city that I've had the pleasure of visiting, a great place. He's also not far from the Moose Run Golf Course, and I just had to mention that as well. It's so Alaska, what can I say? And when Absolutely. I was in Anchorage, I did see moose and caribou, and it was pretty cool.
Yes.
He's a prolific author, producer of training programs on diverse topics ranging from politics to money to self-improvement. rather than shorten his time with us, let's hear from him now. Welcome, Scott.
Well, thanks for having me, David. I appreciate that. I just want to mention, since you brought up Moose Run, I was out on the golf course last week, and we had a black bear out there with us, helping us move along.
And what is the approach with I know grizzlies are really, really scary. What's the approach with a black bear?
For the most part, they're more timid. So the grizzlies know that they're the big dogs, so to speak, but the black bears are a little more timid. So we didn't have any problems.
Good to hear. Did you ever lose any balls where a moose or a bear took one?
Well, I usually end up my golf game with more balls than I started with, because I'm usually in the woods. So I might not end up with mine, but I end up with somebody's.
Yeah. Well, Scott, I envy you to the extent that you've been able to find enough time to go golfing. I did some golfing in the late 90s with my two sons, and we worked together with a coach and did that for over a year and a half. And I still have a set of clubs somewhere. But frankly, I have been so incredibly busy that I really just don't do that. Yes. But I think it's terrific, and I bet you it's a gorgeous place to play golf.
It was beautiful. Yes, absolutely.
Super. Scott, let's tell our audience why they should read Sheep, Herders, Wolves. What a great title.
Thanks. Well, Sheep, Herders, Wolves, I call it's an answer to why we are where we are. And you look at that both politically and socially, why we are where we are. But I've written it as I subtitle as a modern American fable. So it's a fictional story, but it's a story about how we got here. And just synopsis real quick, it's a college student. He's finishing up his term. And at last night of the term, the celebration, one of his friends says, hey, society works by two dictums. Might makes right, which always results in the many serving the few. Might makes right, which results in the many serving the few. And our hero in the story, Jeff, says, hey, that doesn't sit well with him. So he leaves and he goes home for the weekend or for winter break, and he runs into some family situations, and he says, hey, Jose's comment, might makes right, doesn't fit right with my family situation. With ourselves, we did a 60th anniversary celebration. He goes to church and he gets the sermon. It's all not sitting right. So on a Sunday afternoon, he plays cribbage. He always plays cribbage when he's home with his grandfather. He brings it up with his grandfather, and his grandfather, who is an immigrant, came over from France right after World War II, says, let me tell you a story my father told me right on the fields of Normandy in 1944. And he tells him the story of Sheep, Herders, Wolves, which is this fable of God experimenting before he creates humans. He's got to figure out, how am I going to make this human that I give free will to, but then they're not extremely big or ferocious, but they've got to get along socially. So he runs an experiment with sheep. He says, okay, I'm going to give sheep are very social, they're very capable, but for sheep to survive, leaders have to emerge. So I'm going to give these sheep these ability to change into leaders when it's needed. And just when things get tough, always some sheep decide to emerge as leaders and guard and guide the flock. But God gave them free will. So the sheep could also decide, I don't want to go with the flock. I want to go on my own way and become a wolf. And so the sheep could transition to become wolves, and that's when the trouble begins. So it's much like we are, as in this analogy, we are the flock. We need leaders to emerge to guide and guard us, and we need to go along with that good guidance and guardianship. But at the same time, we can choose to go the more self-centered, self-absorbed path, and that's when all the trouble happens. So the story plays out again and again. Always, if good leadership emerges, the sheep flourish. If the wolves take over, then the flock is decimated. But eventually, always the same thing would always happen. Once the flock's decimated, the wolves turn on each other. And that played out over and over and over again. And God set the experiment, and the afternoon of cribbage ends with Papa telling his grandson, Jeff, that it's up to us to choose which course we're going to follow. And that's hopefully a dose of inspiration.
That's fascinating, Scott. And I guess, again, we've got fairly short time. We want to get our audience engaged and learn a little bit more about you. Give us the Cliff Notes version of the truth about American politics.
That's another thing I'm working on. I've got an audio program out on the web, but I've also completing a book, and I'm posting it on my blog, on my website. But I've titled it, "Are Americans Really This Stupid? Are Politicians Really This Inept?" So get to the short answer to that. Americans aren't stupid, but I think by and large, we tend to be lazy. We always take the path of least resistance. We've got to understand, now this is where I get to the truth about politics. Politics is a power game. Always has been, always will be. Some people play it very, very well. And what happens in our American political system is the people, we the people, think that we elect representatives who are going to look out for our best interests. Well, what in fact happens is they're ultimately concentrating power in the hands of a small few folks who actually employ them. And this is where we go wrong. And the truth about politics is understanding that it's a power game. It always works this way, whether it's an autocracy or it's a democracy. It's a few people at the top that actually take control of the power. We need to understand that. And the way to change that is to actually distribute the power and empower more people. Until we figure that out, how to do that, then we are going to continue to struggle. That's essentially, in a nutshell, the truth about politics.
That sounds great, Scott. And that fits with one of my personal campaigns, which is that we have got to get term limits. We've got to have term limits all across the board. And I promote that in my book. And we're going to talk some more about it. I have a new book coming out later this summer, and one of the pitches in the book is for term limits. So sounds like we're on the same wavelength.
It's funny. I read your book, The Decline of America, and I looked at your prescription, and I thought, okay, you and I are on the same page.
Well, Scott, I much admire what you've talked about in your background. Like I said, spent some time on your website. We've got a little bit of time left. I want you to talk a little bit about a topic we haven't talked about yet, and that's everybody loves to make money. It's part of the American tradition, and you're working on a book called Money: The New Science of Making It, and it's a 2021 posting. So tell us quickly about that.
Yeah, so this essentially is my focus is understanding fundamentals. So it's fundamentals of leadership and success. And so one of the areas I focused on is money. And the challenge is everybody wants money. And there's two ways to acquire money, if you will. One way is to make it. The other is to take it. We've got a lot of folks, I think, are in the wrong direction in the take it side. The make it side is essentially you got to understand what money is. Now, if you go out on the street and you ask people, you hold up a $100 bill and you say, what's this backed by? People will say, some will tell you it's backed by gold. It's not backed by gold.
Of course.
Our currency is completely based. It's fiat currency based on trust. It's fundamentally about trust. The foundation of all wealth creation is people doing something. So trade, commerce, business is people doing something and trading, engaging with each other. So understanding how to make money is understanding that, first of all, money is a tool, but it's a tool that facilitates trade, which is people doing things for each other. And that's essentially what this book is about, understanding what the fundamentals of money are and then how to make money.
Incredible, Scott. Well, you are a true Renaissance man. That term gets paraded out from time to time. If our audience would like some more information, where should they go?
Well, I have my website is Scott, SCOTT, F as in Frank, Parody, PARADIS.com, scottfparody.com. That's a great place.
Sounds pretty easy, and that sounds great. Well, listen, keep doing what you're doing. It's fascinating stuff, and I hope a few of our people will go check you out.
Absolutely. Thank you, David. I appreciate it.
Take it easy, man. It's so good to speak with you.
Great to speak with you.